Welcome to another chilling episode of Whispers at Night. Today, we're diving into the eerie world of cruise ship horror stories, where the vast ocean, isolation, and a sense of foreboding create the backdrop for 10 truly disturbing tales. But before we embark on this eerie journey, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. Sharing it with your friends and family would mean the world to me. I'm also curious to know where you're tuning in from, so feel free to drop a comment. Your support is invaluable, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Now let's delve into the shadows and uncover the secrets that lie beneath the waves. I'd been desperate for a break. The typical 40-hour work weeks had crept into 60, and just the thought of one more email was making my left eye twitch uncontrollably. So I booked myself a solo cruise departing from Miami, a last-minute deal for a week-long trip through the Caribbean. I wasn't concerned about the stops, I just needed to disconnect. No calls, no meetings, no responsibilities, only fresh ocean air and a cabin where nobody knew me. I told only a couple people, my sister Claire and a coworker, Brian, who I trusted to cover for me. I boarded with a book, my noise-canceling headphones, and no solid plans at all. My cabin was modest but decent. A small porthole window, a compact bed, and a bathroom that looked like it had been updated in the last decade. The bathroom door was one of those old, heavy, inward-swinging types you'd see in older hotels. But from that very first night, something strange caught my attention. At around 3:15 a.m., the bathroom door would slowly creep open. Not swing wide or bang open, but ease itself open inch by inch, as if someone was gently pushing it. I assumed maybe the ship's subtle motion was knocking it, but the door was thick and the latch clicked firmly closed every time I shut it. Still, I started jamming a towel under the base before sleep. It didn't stop the door, though. The second night was eerily similar. Between 3:10 and 3:20 a.m., the door inched open again. I double-checked the towel was still wedged in place. The room was perfectly still. The door moved silently, as if an invisible hand was cautiously easing it open. No wind, no engine noises, just a faint creak and the slightest shift in air pressure as the door cracked. By the third night, I was more annoyed than scared. I called down to maintenance and asked if they could check the door's hinges or whether the ship was off balance. Miguel came up early the next morning, did a quick inspection, and assured me everything was solid. "This door won't just open by itself," he said, giving it a firm shove. "It's too stiff. If anything, it should stay shut." I set up my phone to record that night, propping it on a coffee mug across the room so the bathroom door was in view. I left the towel wedged and clicked the door shut hard before starting the recording around 3 a.m. When I checked the footage at 6, I expected nothing but shadows or an accidental swing. Instead, at 3:16, the door creaked open, slow and deliberate. What froze me wasn't the door, it was the mirror. In the mirror's reflection, just for a fleeting moment, a figure appeared behind where I should have been lying. A tall, thin man in what looked like a formal suit. Something felt wrong, though. His arms were slightly too long, and his head was cocked unnaturally, like it didn't quite sit right. I stared at the video for what felt like an eternity, rewinding again and again, convincing myself it had to be a shadow or a strange reflection from the TV. But the TV was off, the cabin lights were out. The only illumination was faint hallway light spilling through the bathroom door crack. I paused the video right on the frame where he stood behind me. He wasn't fuzzy or blurred, he was crystal clear, like he belonged there, captured perfectly by the mirror, except he wasn't really there. Heart pounding, I jumped out of bed and switched on every light I could find. I scanned the room. Nothing. Silent. Empty. Just the pounding of my heart echoing in my ears. I headed straight to security. Didn't mention ghosts or hauntings, just said I thought someone might have been in my cabin. I showed the video to a security staffer named Sam. He watched intently, leaning forward when the door opened on the video. Then, abruptly, the screen went black for about 2 seconds. When it returned, Ned, that entire section was gone. Sam asked me to send the video to their internal system. I did, but when they checked the file, it was corrupted. Wouldn't play past the door opening. Sam suggested maybe it was a transfer error, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Later that night, I got a call from the front desk asking if they could send someone to inspect my room. Said it was an internal audit or maintenance check. I agreed, though it felt unnecessary. An hour later, a woman from housekeeping knocked. Laura, her name tag read. Clipboard in hand, she was polite but distant. She didn't fully enter, just glanced around and peeked inside the bathroom before jotting notes. I asked bluntly if anyone had reported weird occurrences in the room before. She hesitated a moment, then replied, "No, sir, not that I'm aware of." But her tone was rehearsed, like she'd heard the stories many times before. As she left, she muttered almost too quietly for me to hear, "That room stayed empty for a long time after an accident. I don't know the details." I wasn't ready to let go. Next morning, I asked the guest desk if there were any reports or notes about the cabin. They looked surprised. The clerk typed in my room number and subtly shifted her expression. "I'm sorry, but guest records can't be shared." I pressed on, asking if she could at least confirm if there had been an incident. She typed again, frowned, and said, "The system shows the room was unoccupied for nearly 11 months before your check-in." Said it so casually, as if almost a year of vacancy was normal. No further explanation. I asked why. "I'm not authorized to discuss that," was all she said before turning back to her screen. After that, I couldn't relax. With all the lights on and the door wedged, I still found myself watching the mirror more than the door, like my mind decided the danger was coming from that reflection. Sleep eluded me, At night, every creak of the ship sounded like footsteps. At one point, I swear I heard a breath right behind me, deep and deliberate. I spun around, heart racing, but no one was there. And the bathroom door cracked open again. I tried wedging a shoe under it this time. Didn't matter. I seriously considered abandoning the cruise at the next port, but couldn't bear explaining why. Instead, I asked for a cabin change, citing trouble sleeping. The woman at the desk didn't question me. She just nodded, typed some commands, and reassigned me 2 decks up. The new room was smaller, no porthole view, but the bathroom door stayed firmly shut. Not a creak or whisper in 3 nights. I didn't bother recording in the new room, just wanted to survive the trip. Back home, I hoped to retrieve the original video from my cloud backup. Same corrupted clip, cut off at 3:16 right as the door creaked and the figure appeared. Tried 2 recovery programs. No luck. Like something overwrote the file mid-frame, I gave up. I still keep the phone and the video file. I don't watch it anymore. It feels like it wants to be forgotten. Whenever I open the folder, my phone glitches briefly, just enough to make me close it. I don't claim to understand what happened in that room. Maybe there's a rational explanation hidden in some report the staff won't share. Or maybe I was just unlucky enough to be booked in a cabin with something or someone left behind. And there's one detail I can't shake. That final morning, as I wheeled my luggage toward the elevator, I passed Laura again. She didn't look up, didn't smile, didn't say hello, just muttered under her breath like it wasn't meant for me. "You shouldn't have recorded it." I hadn't originally planned to take that cruise. It was actually my mom's idea. She found a last-minute deal online and thought it would be a great way for us to spend some time together before summer got too hectic. At the time, I was between jobs and recently single after a short-lived relationship, desperately needing a break from my apartment. So I agreed. The ship departed from Galveston, heading on a 7-day loop through the Gulf with stops in Cozumel and Roatan. It was a laid-back itinerary, just beaches, buffets, and time to zone out. Our cabin was tucked away at the very end of one of those long, silent hallways that saw hardly any foot traffic. Right next to our door was a crew-only door, leading to a narrow stairwell guests weren't allowed to use. I thought the location was perfect, quiet, out of the way, no one slamming doors at night. The walls were beige with small sconces, casting a warm, low light every few feet. There was a faint scent of sea salt mixed with industrial cleaner. Most nights, I fell asleep easily after dinner and drinks, but by the third night I started waking around the same time, a few minutes past 2:00 a.m. It began with footsteps, not loud but distinct, the sharp, rhythmic clicking of someone walking in heels. Not the clunky kind you hear on a theater stage, but subtle, measured, precise. The footsteps came from far down the corridor and always approached slowly, as if the person walked purposefully but wasn't in a hurry. And they always stopped right in front of our door, not next to it nor across the hall, but right outside our cabin. The first time I heard it, I held my breath and listened, half expecting a knock or keys jingling. But nothing happened, just silence. When I finally mustered the courage to check the peephole, no one was there. By the fourth night, the pattern became routine. I'd wake up at the same time, my heart racing even before opening my eyes. The footsteps followed the same pace and stopped in the same spot every time outside our door. I tried telling myself it was probably a crew member on a weird shift. But why would someone be walking alone in heels down a hallway that led nowhere but our cabin and a locked staff stairwell? One night, I stayed up with the lights off and my phone in hand, determined to catch whoever it was. The moment the first step sounded, I jumped up and looked through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty and still, with only the low hum of overhead artificial lights. On the fifth night, I didn't wait. The second the footsteps reached our door, I yanked it open. I don't know what I expected, maybe a startled crew member. Instead, I caught the tail end of a figure turning the corner at the hallway's far end, just before the door to the stairwell swung shut behind her. She wore a long navy blue uniform, almost like the vintage flight attendant outfits you'd see in old commercials, a stiff collar and a tiny cap pinned to her dark hair. The outfit seemed like it belonged in a museum. More than that, there was something odd about the way she moved. Too stiff, too smooth, almost gliding rather than walking. I stood frozen in the doorway, listening. The click of her heels vanished behind the metal stairwell door. I could hear the engines humming below, the faint sound of a TV from another room, but nothing else. My mom stirred behind me, groggy, and asked why I was up. I told her someone was wandering the halls, and she murmured something about security before rolling over. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I went to guest services and described what I had seen. The woman behind the counter looked confused when I mentioned the uniform. She said no one on staff wore anything like that, especially not at night. I could tell she thought I was mistaken or joking. Back in the cabin, I couldn't stop thinking about the uniform. It felt deliberate, like it had meaning. I tried searching online for vintage cruise line uniforms, but found nothing that matched. The closest was an old 80s ad for a now-defunct cruise company, but even that wasn't quite right. Later that evening, I casually asked a real staff member near the dining hall about the locked stairwell next to our cabin. He gave me a strange look and said it hadn't been in use for years due to a remodel sealing it off. That made no sense. The door still worked, and I'd seen it close. I even saw the woman use it. On our last day, as my mom packed, she pulled out an old family photo album from our very first cruise in the 90s. I was laughing at her haircut and my dad's mustache when my hand stopped on one photo. Behind a lifeboat, there was a blurry figure standing perfectly still. A woman wearing a long navy blue skirt, a stiff collar blouse, and a small hat tilted over her hair. She wasn't smiling or looking at the camera, just staring sideways at nothing. I didn't say anything at first. I kept staring, like the photo might change if I blinked. My mom squinted at it and guessed it was just a passenger in the background. I nodded, but inside I was frozen. I recognized the lines of the uniform, the strange hat, the posture. It was the same woman from the hallway. That photo was taken decades earlier on a completely different ship. The date read July 1994. I was just 3 years old. That night, back home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried rational explanations. Maybe this is a ship reused old uniforms for themed nights. Or maybe I misremembered. But the way she stopped at our door and disappeared through a supposedly sealed stairwell, and then the photo, it didn't add up. The vibe she gave wasn't threatening, but deliberate, like she was checking on something or someone. I wondered if other guests had seen her too, but I found no mention online. A few days later, I emailed the cruise line with a scan of the photo and a description of the uniform. They replied 2 weeks later, saying they had no records of such uniforms and that the staff stairwell next to our cabin had been permanently sealed after a fire drill mishap in the early 2000s. No one should have had access from the guest floor. No explanation, no follow-up. I read their email over and over, trying to find hidden meaning. I still have that photo in a drawer by my bed. Sometimes I take it out and just stare at that small, blurry figure. I don't know what she wanted or why she kept stopping by our door. But what I do know is this. Ever since that night, I have this lingering feeling that she knew I saw her. Like maybe I was supposed to. Like many people in their early 20s, I thought a cruise would be the perfect way to celebrate my college graduation. I was passionate about solo travel and had spent months saving specifically for this Caribbean voyage. For those who have experienced cruises, they often feel like floating cities filled with thousands of strangers. Back in 2019, security measures on these ships fell far short of what cruise lines claim today. Disturbing incidents frequently occurred, passengers disappearing, assaults going unreported, and crew members turning a blind eye to genuine complaints. All of this was conveniently buried beneath corporate policies designed to protect profits rather than people. My name is Olivia. I was 22 and felt invincible. I had just graduated magna cum laude from Northwestern University with a journalism degree. This 7-day Western Caribbean cruise was my reward, a final break before diving into the grind of entry-level reporting. I chose a solo interior cabin on the Carnival Horizon, thinking it was a wise, budget-friendly decision. What I didn't realize was how dangerously that choice would backfire. If cruise security had been stricter, if the ship's confusing layout wasn't like a labyrinth, or if I'd better understood the predatory behaviors aimed at solo female travelers on these giant floating cities, what happened to me would never have escalated so horribly. The cruise lines rake in billions by creating a false sense of safety while systematically failing their most vulnerable passengers. The first day was enchanting. I explored deck after deck, snapped endless photos of the vast ocean, and basked in that liberating feeling of complete detachment from my everyday world. The Carnival Horizon held over 4,000 guests and 1,500 crew members. I loved blending into the crowd, a nameless face among thousands. I ate at buffets, admired the welcome show, and went to sleep, excited for our first port, Cozumel. Then I noticed him. His name was Ethan. Our first meeting was at the coffee bar on Deck 5. He looked to be in his mid-30s, average height, with thinning brown hair and piercing pale blue eyes that seemed to absorb everything around him. His attire was a faded Hawaiian shirt and khaki shorts, the quintessential uniform of an overly relaxed middle-aged cruiser. At first, Ethan appeared harmless. He told me he was also traveling solo, recently divorced, trying to rediscover himself amid open seas. We chatted briefly about upcoming ports and ship amenities. He seemed well-versed, mentioning it was his 4th voyage on this particular ship, knowing all the best photo spots, restaurants with short waits, and friendlier crew. I appreciated meeting someone who could show me the ropes since I was a newbie. But from our initial talk, something was off. Ethan asked too many personal questions: where I was from, my job, whether I truly traveled alone. Hearing him mention my recent graduation triggered a chilling sensation. He stood uncomfortably close and kept sneaking glances at my cabin keycard when I pulled it out to check the number. I wrote it off as awkward social skills from a recently divorced man. On day 2, Ethan seemed to appear everywhere. At the pool, he'd be at the bar nearby. At the gym, he'd be on the treadmill with an unobstructed view of my workout spot. During lunch, he circled my table several times, wearing that same unsettling smile. The feeling of being watched crept in, but I dismissed it as paranoia. After all, ships have limited spaces, and solo travelers often overlap. Day 3 took us to Jamaica. I booked a shore excursion to Dunn's River Falls. Upon returning to the ship, I spotted Ethan waiting on the dock. He wasn't with our group, which meant he'd deliberately come to the pier to wait for returning passengers. Our eyes met. He waved enthusiastically and jogged over to ask how my day was. The fact he knew my return time, without asking about my plans, sent icy chills down my spine. That evening, I chose a specialty restaurant, Deck 8 Steakhouse, to avoid main dining crowds and potentially Ethan. I requested a seat in the back corner near an exit for safety. The meal helped me relax for the first time in days. Then, out of nowhere, Ethan appeared. Unchanged attire, Hawaiian shirt and shorts, but somehow the hostess seated him too. He claimed it was pure coincidence we picked the same spot. He asked if he could join me for a drink. I declined politely, saying I was tired. His smile briefly faded, replaced by a forced grin. Ethan insisted on walking me back to my cabin, calling it the gentlemanly thing to do. Every instinct screamed no, but I'd been raised to be polite, and better the risk than cause a scene. We navigated the ship's winding corridors, stairs, and maze-like interior areas of Deck 2. Ethan spoke casually about the confusing layout, how easy it was to get lost late at night when most people were asleep or in busy public zones. He mentioned my cabin was tucked at the end of a dead-end hallway. Cozy, but could make you feel isolated. His detailed description revealed he had been mapping the ship, watching where I stayed, not idle friendliness, but calculated surveillance. When we reached my cabin door, Ethan lingered, refusing to move on. He interrogated me about plans for the next day, whether I'd stay on board or go ashore at Grand Cayman. I gave vague replies. He pressed for exact activities in bedtime. His tone, one was probing, sweat prickling my forehead despite cold air conditioning. I finally ducked inside, bolted the deadbolt and security chain. Watching through the peephole, Ethan stood nearly 10 minutes staring and moving closer, as if straining to hear inside. Once, I swear, he tested the door handle. Sleep escaped me that night. Every creak, every settling groan of the ship sounded like footsteps approaching. At around 2 a.m., I heard something sliding under the door. With trembling courage, I peeked. Nothing. I stayed vigilant, phone at the ready to call security if Ethan escalated. The next morning, I reported his behavior to the guest services desk. The young woman was polite but dismissive. She said solo travelers often misunderstand friendly gestures, and Ethan was likely just lonely. When I insisted it felt predatory and asked for a cabin change, she said the ship was full, no other rooms available. They logged a complaint against Ethan, but warned they could do little unless he physically threatened me. Her dismissal confirmed I was alone. For days, I followed her advice, stayed in crowded areas, avoided quiet decks, never alone after dark. Yet Ethan had a terrifying knack for finding me regardless. On the final night, at the farewell party on the Leo deck, I thought safety was guaranteed. Crowded, lively, with multiple bars and constant foot traffic, I chose a modest outfit and secured myself near the center. Even there, Ethan watched me from across the deck, standing isolated by the railing. His gaze felt like a physical weight. No matter where I moved, he matched my position, eyes locked on me. At 11 p.m., exhausted and sick from constant vigilance, I planned to retreat to the 24-hour cafe to ride out the last hours surrounded by people. I made my way toward elevators via the busiest parts, but the once vibrant atrium felt cavernous and menacing, passengers thinning as night deepened. I pressed the elevator button, numbers descending. Steps clicked behind, empty hall but a cold sensation of being watched from above. The elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped in, flashing that forced smile. His eyes were different now, predatory and cold like ice. "Going down to your room, Olivia?" he asked, not even needing to see my button choice. He suggested a nightcap before goodbye. I declined and attempted to choose higher floors, but he blocked the buttons. The elevator descended. "You've been avoiding me," he whined. "I thought we were friends." I told him again to leave me alone. He laughed. No humor. "Come on, Olivia. You're alone on this big ship. So am I. We should look out for each other." The elevator stopped on deck 2. The narrow, dim hallway beyond loomed. Ethan gestured for me to exit. I refused. The hall was empty and isolated. The perfect trap. He grabbed my wrist, pulling hard, nails digging in. I screamed and struggled, but he was strong. He shouted I was overreacting and needed to calm down. Just as he nearly pulled me in, the elevator doors began closing again. A call from another floor saved me. I slipped away and pressed against the back wall. His friendly mask shattered to reveal cold calculation. He lunged as doors closed, fingers scraping metal. I rode the elevator up and down for nearly an hour, too terrified to disembark. Finally, on deck 9, near the late-night pizza place, I fled into a crowded corner, eyes darting nervously. The next morning, preparing to disembark in Miami, I saw Ethan one last time, scanning the crowd with that fake smile, waving casually. As if 7 days of stalking and nearly forcing me into a nightmare never happened. I reported everything to port authorities. They said there was nothing to do since I was off the ship and no physical assault occurred. Cruise security footage showed normal conversations without audio capturing menace. I have never cruised again. That experience taught me these floating cities are hunting grounds for predators who exploit isolation and corporate cover-ups, prioritizing reputation over safety. Ethan is probably out there, targeting the next solo female traveler seeking freedom or celebration. If anyone ever makes you uneasy on a cruise, trust your instincts. Don't sacrifice safety for politeness. In the middle of the ocean, help can be very far away. Brooke and I had been married just 9 days when we boarded the cruise. It was meant to be a quick getaway, 5 nights cruising the Eastern Caribbean, booked last minute with a honeymoon gift card. We were living in a cramped one-bedroom in Tampa, juggling wedding stress and work. The idea of no cooking, no emails, just ocean air felt perfect. Our cabin was mid-tier, a modest room with a small balcony on deck 7, starboard side. It wasn't luxurious, but felt like another world. Our neighbors seemed quiet, so we thought. The first night, we met the man in the next cabin. He was already in the hallway when we arrived, leaning on the railing with a drink, wearing a beige windbreaker zipped to his chin. He said his name was Richard, but everyone called him Rick. He was polite enough, maybe in his late 60s, slightly hunched with watery blue eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. He kept calling Brooke young lady, even after introductions. We chalked it up to harmless boomer charm. Rick mentioned he'd been on dozens of cruises and offered unsolicited buffet tips. It felt like small talk, but I sensed he wanted to linger. That night, around 9:10 p.m., I woke to pacing sounds. Not footsteps above or below, but right against our wall. 5 or 6 steps, stop, repeat. Then came faint tapping, like someone fingernailing the wall or the metal vent connecting our rooms. Brooke was awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering, "Do you hear that too?" We didn't say much else. Eventually the sound stopped, and we fell back asleep with the balcony door cracked. The next day, we saw Rick again, reading a paperback in a deck chair outside his cabin, greeting us with that frozen smile. I noticed his door was slightly ajar, barely a crack, like he hadn't fully closed it. It struck me as odd, since cabin doors lock automatically unless wedged. We ignored it, going about the day, pool, trivia, lunch. That night, the noises returned, only earlier, about 11:30 p.m., pacing heavier, quicker, then tapping. Then whispers, quiet, breathy murmurs like someone speaking into a wall. Brooke sat up, staring at the vent to our rooms. I pressed my ear to it, hearing a voice but no words. I knocked once, firm. Everything went silent. No shuffles, no creaks, just stillness, as if whoever was there waited for us to react. The next morning we reported it to Malik, a crew member on our floor. He gave a sympathetic look, said cabin walls are thin, it might be snoring or a TV, but jotted notes and promised to check. Later, returning from the pool, Brooke stopped dead in the hallway. Folded neatly on the railing dividing our rooms was a pair of her black and pink underwear, packed but never worn. She picked it up like it was radioactive, skin draining of color. We looked at Rick's closed, silent door. We barely slept. Brooke kept the lights on. I pushed a vanity chair under our door handle, hoping to block it. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard the faintest sound of our doorknob moving. Not turning, just a soft click, like pressure testing. When I moved toward it, everything stopped. We didn't open it. We sat in the dark, listening to occasional footsteps. Exhaustion won, and we drifted off. By morning, Rick was gone, not at breakfast, not in the hall. His door stayed shut all day. We assumed he'd gone on an excursion or didn't want company. That night after dinner, something felt off. The cruise app showed 4 entries on our door while we were away. Brooke and I took our cards. No one else should have been inside. Inside, nothing obviously missing, but bags shifted, her suitcase half-zipped, my shaving kit on the bed, though it had been in the bathroom drawer. Every zipper and pocket had been opened. We called guest services immediately. Carla met us with a security officer 15 minutes later. We showed the app log, recounted moved items, and mentioned the underwear. Carla looked concerned when we said the entries happened while away. The officer scanned the door and confirmed only 3 cards opened it. Mine, Brooke's, and Rick's. But Rick supposedly had a different block of cabins. Records showed room 7147, where Rick claimed to stay, was unoccupied from voyage start. It hit us like a brick. Brooke's second-day balcony selfie showed Rick's arm resting on the next railing. Proof he was real. Security took it seriously. They opened the neighboring cabin and let us watch. The room was empty, spotless. Bed made perfectly, no luggage, no signs anyone stayed. A faint, sharp cologne smell lingered. Behind the bathroom mirror, taped, was a napkin with coded numbers and the word observation. Security promised to review footage and escalate, but we never heard anything else. We requested a cabin change. They moved us 2 decks down that night. We spent the final day in a fog, too anxious to relax, unsure what to do. Brooke barely spoke, compulsively checking her suitcase for surprises. I locked every drawer and latch. We never saw Rick again. No one matching his description surfaced despite asking around. We even showed his photo to Malik. He hadn't seen the man. To this day, no clue who Rick really was or how he stayed in a room the ship claimed empty. We changed all passwords and tossed most of the clothes brought. We reported to corporate, receiving only a generic apology and a 15% discount on future cruises. Never used. Brooke now triple checks every lock staying anywhere. I can't walk down carpeted hallways with soft yellow lights without thinking of Rick's door, slightly ajar, wondering if he was ever supposed to be there at all. About a year after my divorce, I started working night shifts as a janitor on cruise ships. My son Liam was 6, and my sister took care of him when I was away. It wasn't ideal, but the pay was better than anything I'd find back in Tampa. The hours were grueling and days blurred together, but I managed. Mostly, I kept to myself, pushing the mop cart through endless corridors, tuning into podcasts, and chatting occasionally with the kitchen crew during smoke breaks. The job came with an eerie kind of silence. Not peaceful, just quiet. The kind that makes you feel watched even when no one's around. On the 4th day of a Caribbean 10-day route, I met a man. He was sitting alone near the back railing on the Leo deck late at night after most guests had gone to bed. I was emptying trash bins when he called out. He said the ocean at night made him feel small. His name was Dylan, thin, pale, early 40s, with deep circles like he hadn't slept in weeks. His voice was soft, every word struggling to get past some invisible barrier. I figured he was lonely. Happens a lot. People pay thousands to escape, only to end up more isolated. Over the next few nights I saw him again, late, always alone, seated on the same bench. We'd talk for a few minutes, small talk. He asked about the ship, my schedule, how long I'd worked there, said he was a freelance writer working on a book about isolation at sea. I didn't think much of it. Honestly, it was nice to have someone to talk to who wasn't drunk or yelling orders. He joked about how I must have keys to every locked door. I laughed it off, told him the master badge was the only thing useful for that. He smiled like he knew something, but said nothing. 3 days later, Dylan vanished. When I clocked in that night, my locker was ajar. My uniform jacket and master access badge, missing. My stomach dropped. Security dismissed it as a mistake. I was stuck without access. Every door I passed, every hallway felt different. Walls seeming to close almost in. The next night, there was a break-in at the jewelry boutique. No cameras in the storage room, but someone used a master badge to get past 2 secured doors. I was pulled aside by security, 2 guys I barely knew. They grilled me about my badge, movements, whether I lent my uniform. I told them it was stolen. They exchanged looks like they'd heard this story before, said they'd review the footage. Their words stuck with me. We'll review the footage. No promise of help, no resolve. For days, everyone avoided me. The kitchen staff stopped talking. My supervisor gave me a new ID, but restricted access. Humiliating. 2 nights later, someone tried to swipe into the engine room. Security stopped them just in time. The intruder had the right badge, but fled when the door wouldn't open. That's when security took it seriously. They showed me the footage in the surveillance room. At first, just a tall man in a janitor's uniform strolling down D-deck. Then he turned toward the camera. It was Dylan. He wore my uniform and my badge clipped to the front. He'd even shave to look like me. Same cap pulled low, same gait. If I hadn't known him, I would have thought it was me staring back. It was like looking at my shadow. One guard muttered, "He must have planned this." My heart pounded in my ears. They froze the footage on his face. All I could say was, "That's not me." Head of security looked at me long and said, "He's not in the system. No room, no booking, no ID." It made no sense. He had a room key. I'd seen it. We talked for days. How does someone live on a ship without being on the manifest? Next morning, the ship docked in Puerto Rico. Security swept every room and hallway. Nothing. Dylan vanished. His room was cleaned out. No clothes, no suitcase, no diary, just an empty coffee mug on the balcony table and a folded towel on the bed like he'd followed turned-down service. It was as if he never existed, except he'd worn my name, my badge, my uniform, and walked among us like me. For a few minutes, he got away with it. After that, nothing felt normal. I finished the rotation, but kept to myself. Couldn't trust anyone, not even my memories. I replayed every conversation with him, searching for clues, signs I missed. The more I thought, the more I felt he'd studied me. Not just talked, but studied my posture, schedule, voice. No one had paid that much attention to me before. It made my stomach churn. Weeks after I got back to Florida, I received a letter from the DMV. My license suspended for a DUI arrest in Oregon. I'd never been to Oregon. I thought it was a scam. Called the number. They read out my full name, birth date, social security number. I froze. I called the sheriff's office in Oregon. They confirmed someone was arrested under my identity. The mugshot was blurry, but looked a lot like Dylan. Months passed as I worked with a lawyer clearing the mess. Identity theft tangled with my taxes, credit, and work clearance. I carried notarized letters just to prove who I was. But what haunted me most wasn't the paperwork. It was that someone lived as me, walked inside my skin, not just stealing ID, slipping into my life as a costume, then vanished, no trail, no motive, no explanation, just gone like a ghost. I still work cruise ships, switching companies every few contracts. I keep my badge on a chain under my uniform and triple-check my locker. Sometimes, staring out at the ocean at night, I wonder if Dylan's out there, boarding another ship, watching someone else, slipping into a new name, a new face. Wonder if I was just one stop on his route, another uniform to borrow. I haven't seen him since, but I don't think I've seen the last of him. My name is Jake, I'm 36, and this happened about 7 months ago on a cruise I took with my younger sister Natalie. She had just finalized a tough divorce after 7 years with a guy who slowly isolated her from everyone. I thought a change of scenery might help her remember who she was outside that mess. I covered most of the cost and booked us side-by-side balcony cabins on a mid-tier cruise ship leaving from Galveston. It was my first cruise, and honestly, I was way more excited than I should have been. My life is all deadlines and meetings, and this felt like the first real break I'd had in years. The ship had that odd corporate warmth vibe. Always clean, too bright in the mornings, with synthetic floral carpets that made static every time I walked in socks. The first few days went smoothly. Natalie seemed lighter. She laughed more, let her hair down, and started chatting with strangers at the buffet. We'd do our own thing during the day, then meet for drinks at sunset, talking across our balcony rails. Our cabins were separate but close enough that if we leaned out, we could hear each other. We watched the ocean slip by and pointed out cargo ships like little kids. The rhythm of the waves, the glow of the moon, it was soothing, like the ship was trying to lull us into forgetting the outside world. On the fourth night, just after 3 a.m., I woke to frantic knocking on my cabin door. I knew it was Natalie before I even looked through the peephole. She knocked as if trying to warn me, not just get in. She was barefoot, trembling, wearing an oversized sleep shirt twisted around her. She didn't wait for questions. She just said, "Someone was on my balcony." Her face was pale, like she'd been holding her breath. I tried to stay calm and asked if she was sure. She said yes, she'd woken to someone standing just beyond the glass. Motionless, not knocking, not trying to open, eyeing. Not trying to open the door, just watching her. I stood silent for a moment, half asleep, trying to reason it out. Maybe someone was drunk and wandered onto the wrong balcony. Maybe she'd imagined it. She hadn't been sleeping well, and she said the constant ship motion was messing with her head, but she was adamant. "His shoes made this scuff sound," she said, like dragging rubber soles across tile. I went with her to the balcony, my heart racing just enough to make me alert. Nothing was there, no sign of forced entry. The glass door was locked from the inside. I remember the loud hum of the engine in that dead silence. It filled the air like static you can't turn off. I convinced her to sleep in my room that night, which wasn't ideal. These cruise beds aren't built well for two adults who toss and turn, but she didn't argue. The next morning I stopped by guest services to ask if any balconies had security cameras. Turns out cameras are only in hallways and common areas, none pointing at the balconies. The staff member was polite but unconcerned. "Probably someone having a bit too much fun," he said, like Natalie hadn't been scared stiff. That dismissiveness bothered me. I hated how easy it was to brush it off, but I didn't push. Didn't want Natalie to feel overreacting, though I was starting to doubt that myself. That evening, we skipped our usual balcony drink. Natalie kept glancing anxiously at her curtain, like expecting it to move. Around midnight, she said she wanted to try sleeping in her own bed again to feel normal. I offered to stay in her room. She hesitated, then agreed. We locked the glass door, drew the curtains tight, and I even pushed a lounge chair in front of the door. Not that it could stop anyone, but it gave us something to focus on. Lights off, I lay on the second bed, scrolling on my phone. At exactly 2:44 a.m., I know because I checked. I saw the curtain nearest to the glass door ripple. It wasn't wind, the AC vent was on the other side. It moved like someone pinched the fabric and let go. I sat up hard, punching my ribs. Natalie didn't notice. She was asleep. I quietly crept to the curtain, reached out slowly, then yanked it open. The balcony was empty, No sound but the steady churn of the ocean below. I stepped out barefoot, trying not to alert anyone despite my loud breathing. I looked left. Nothing. Looked right. Just a thin metal divider between her balcony and the next. That's when I noticed it. The gap between the divider and railing wasn't flush like I'd thought. There was a narrow space, maybe 10 inches wide, just enough for someone to squeeze through sideways. I crouched and saw faint shoe marks, dirt smudges like someone had braced a foot while ducking through. My stomach dropped. The neighboring cabin had looked empty all week, curtains drawn, lights off. I stared at the gap as cold wind brushed my arms. No way this was some drunk guest. Whoever it was had done it more than once. They never tried opening the door or saying anything, just stood and watched. I didn't sleep that night. Sat by the balcony door, lights on, eyes glued to the curtain, waiting for movement. Natalie slept, probably exhaustion. My mind ran laps. Who crawls between balconies night after night just to stare? What do they get out of it? The next morning, I went straight back to guest services. Told them everything. That's off, I didn't care about sounding paranoid. The woman at the counter raised her brows when I mentioned the scuff marks. She typed something, smiled tight, said she'd notify security. That afternoon, I got a call to meet with the ship's security officer. He walked me through hallway footage. Nothing unusual. Natalie's hallway cameras showed only us coming and going, no one else. I asked about the cabin next door, the empty one. He pulled up records. Completely unoccupied for the entire cruise. No check-ins, no access logs, no cleaning logged after departure. Vacant. A cold wave crawled over me. I asked if staff ever entered for maintenance. He shook his head. Flagged for interior repairs, sealed before departure. Didn't make sense. I'd seen footprints, saw that curtain move. Natalie had seen someone twice. Unless someone climbed the balconies in the dark, no one should have been there. The ship's outside rails were curved and slick. You'd have to be borderline insane or incredibly agile to risk the fall. I asked if they'd checked the room. He said yes, but I got no follow-up. Natalie was already packing, her hands shaking every time she zipped a compartment. We both knew we wouldn't enjoy the rest of the cruise. That night, we slept in my cabin. Both balcony doors locked and blocked. Every creak, every bump, made me flinch. We disembarked 2 days later and flew straight home. Natalie hasn't been on a cruise since. I can't blame her. I probably won't either. Sometimes I think about when I saw the curtain move. Wonder if I'd opened it a second later, would I have seen a face staring back, a body halfway through that narrow gap? There's something about that silence, that stillness. It felt like whoever was out there didn't want to break it, like watching us was enough. I still think about it when I wake up in the dead of night, feel the darkness press against my bedroom window. It's different from fear, more like a hum in the background. A knowing. Natalie and I talked months later. She whispered, "He didn't want in. He wanted to be seen." That, honestly, is the part that scares me the most.
Booking the cruise felt like a reward after years of hard work. Just me and my best friend Amy. 7 days in the Caribbean. No parents, no professors, no emails. Just drinks, sun, and maybe some bad decisions. We had just graduated from university, and that June felt like the first deep breath after holding it all in. Amy was the social spark, loud and bright, while I was the more cautious one. I'd never been on a cruise before, or even left the mainland. When we stepped onto the huge ship in Fort Lauderdale, my excitement mixed with a buzz that wasn't just from the champagne we split in the elevator. Our cabin was small, but cozy. 2 single beds, pushed into a corner, a tiny desk, and a narrow closet with a mirrored door that made the whole room feel like a funhouse. We'd laugh every time we bumped into each other getting dressed. The first night went as expected. Rum punches, a tacky dance floor, too much perfume in the air. We stumbled back to the cabin after midnight, tipsy and loud. Amy shut the door and locked it. Deadbolt, handle lock, every lock engaged. I watched, knowing it was part of our routine, especially since the hallways gave me the creeps at night. They felt too quiet for so many people on board. The next night, I woke up cold, not just chilly, but that deep cold that clenched my teeth and tensed my shoulders without me realizing. I sat up confused, and that's when I noticed it. The cabin door was open. Not wide open, just cracked enough for faint hallway light to spill across the carpet. I froze. My first thought was Amy had gone out and forgot to close it properly, but she was still in bed, mouth slightly open, breathing steady. I got up quietly, pushed the door shut, locked it again, and stood there trying to shake the strange knot in my stomach. The next morning, I told Amy about it. She just blinked, still brushing mascara off her lashes, and said, "Girl, you probably forgot to lock it after we got in." But I knew I hadn't. I hadn't even drunk much. Still, I let it go. It's easy to doubt yourself in a new place, right? Things got weirder. A bracelet I'd packed was missing from the nightstand. My lipstick vanished. Amy laughed, saying I probably left it in the bathroom downstairs. I hadn't. I'd used it just before bed, right beside the charging port. By the fourth night, I was double-checking everything, snapping pictures of my stuff before bed, just to make sure I wasn't losing it. I didn't tell Amy that part. She already thought I was overthinking, and I didn't want to ruin the trip. That night, I took a photo of the vanity, zipped my purse, locked the door, and even wedged one of my sneakers in front of it. Not enough to stop it opening, but enough that if it moved, I'd know. We stayed out late for movie night. When we returned, everything seemed normal. But the sneaker had shifted a few inches to the left. I didn't sleep well. Every sound was sharper, my brain on high alert. Around 2 a.m., I woke again, feeling a heavy stillness in the air. Amy was snoring softly. I lay frozen, eyes half open, listening. That's when I heard it, the faintest metallic click. The doorknob turned slowly and deliberately, not jiggling or confused like someone who knew exactly how to unlock it. I barely breathed. Whoever it was didn't come in. The knob stopped turning, then nothing. I waited as long as I could before getting up. The door was locked again, just as I left it. But my sneaker was now on the other side of the room. The next morning, I told Amy everything. The knob, sneaker, lipstick. She finally stopped brushing it off. Her face went pale. She admitted her headphones had disappeared a couple nights before but didn't want to mention it, thinking she'd dropped them on the pool deck. We went straight to guest services. Told them someone had a copy of our key and had been sneaking into our room at night. The woman behind the desk smiled politely, but her eyes flickered. She said she'd report it and have security check the logs, and offered to move us to another room. We took the offer. They moved us 2 floors up, same layout but on the opposite side. We packed quickly and left in under 20 minutes. That night, I barely slept. At least nothing happened. The next morning, we went back to grab the rest of Amy's stuff from the closet. Cleaning crew was inside. I stepped in and stopped cold. On the pillow of my old bed was my missing bracelet, coiled neatly like it had never been gone. I didn't touch it. Just stared. Amy came in, frozen too. No words needed. The room was spotless otherwise, like no one had stepped foot in there since we left. But that bracelet. It was placed too deliberately, too perfectly. No toss, no forgetfulness. It felt like a message. "I was here. I'll always be here," I asked the cleaning lady. She shook her head, said she hadn't started on that bed yet. Later that afternoon, a security guy called to follow up. He sounded uneasy. He said the digital keycard logs showed no entries between midnight and 7 a.m. on any nights except ours. No MasterCards, no employee access. That didn't make sense. I asked if it could be a malfunction or bypass. He got quiet, said, "That's not supposed to be possible, ma'am." He thanked me for reporting it and said management would reach out. No one ever did. Amy and I didn't talk much for the rest of the trip. We stuck to crowded areas, avoided the cabin during the day, and double-locked the new room every night. Nothing else went missing. No more strange noises. The vibe between us changed. Like we both knew something strange had happened. Something we couldn't explain. Amy got jumpier, more defensive. I went quiet. We used to joke that this cruise would be our last hurrah before adulthood. I didn't think it'd feel so literal. Back home in Arizona, I boxed up the clothes I wore and haven't touched them since. I haven't seen Amy in months. We text occasionally, but I feel the distance. That bracelet? I left it on the ship, still sitting on the pillow when we disembarked. I don't know if someone had a copy of our key or if someone never left that cabin. But one thing I do know, that cabin door was locked from the inside every time.
Back in August 2017, I decided to treat myself to a solo cruise for my 30th birthday. I'd been going through a rough divorce, and my therapist suggested that some time alone might help me process everything and gain some perspective. I booked a 7-day Eastern Caribbean cruise on the Norwegian Dawn, figuring that being surrounded by tropical waters and endless entertainment would be the perfect distraction from the mess my life had become. As a single woman traveling alone, I was initially nervous about the whole experience, but everyone I talked to assured me that cruise ships were incredibly safe environments with security everywhere. The Norwegian Dawn was a mid-sized ship carrying about 2,400 passengers, which felt more intimate than those massive floating cities you see advertised everywhere. My cabin was on Deck 8 interior with no balcony, but I'd splurged on a larger room since I'd be spending a lot of time there. The first few days were exactly what I needed. I slept in late, ate whatever I wanted, spent hours reading by the pool, and attended the evening shows without worrying about anyone else's schedule. For the first time in months, I felt like I was starting to remember who I was outside of my failed marriage. It was on the third day while we were docked in St. Thomas that I first encountered Marco. I was coming back to my cabin around 10 Hancock p.m. after spending the evening exploring Charlotte Amalie and was having trouble with my key card. The magnetic strip seemed to be malfunctioning, and no matter how I swiped it, the door wouldn't unlock. After several frustrating minutes of trying different angles and speeds, a crew member appeared at the end of the hallway and asked if I needed help. Marco was probably in his late 20s with dark hair and an accent I couldn't quite place, maybe Italian or Spanish. He was wearing the standard crew uniform with a name G-U-G-G that identified him as part of the housekeeping staff. "Let me try that for you," he said with a friendly smile, taking my key card. He managed to get the door open on his first attempt using some kind of technique that involved holding the card at a specific angle. "These cards, they can be very tricky," he explained, handing it back to me. "But I have been working on ships for 8 years now. I know all their secrets." I thanked him and was about to go into my cabin when he continued the conversation. "You are traveling alone?" "Yes, I noticed because I clean your room every day, and there is only one person's things." Something about the way he said this made me slightly uncomfortable. It felt like he was paying too much attention to the details of my personal space, but I figured he was just being friendly, maybe looking for a tip, so I smiled politely and confirmed that yes, I was traveling solo. "That is very brave," he said, leaning against the doorframe in a way that partially blocked my entrance to the cabin. "Many women, they are too scared to travel alone on cruise ships, but you seem very independent." The way he said that last word, with a slight pause and a look that seemed to linger too long, made my skin crawl. I mumbled something about being tired and needing to get some sleep, but he didn't seem to take the hint. "If you need anything during your cruise, anything at all, you just ask for Marco, okay? I work the night shift, so I'm always around when things get quiet." He finally stepped away from the doorframe, but not before looking me up and down in a way that felt completely inappropriate. I quickly thanked him again and practically slammed the door behind me, engaging both the deadbolt and the security latch. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Maybe Marco was just being friendly and my recent divorce had made me paranoid about men's intentions. But when I returned to my cabin that afternoon, I immediately noticed that something was off. My clothes, which I'd left scattered around the room, were neatly organized in a way that seemed too methodical for standard housekeeping. My underwear, which had been in a messy pile in my suitcase, was now arranged in neat stacks. Even more disturbing, my journal, which I'd hidden under some clothes at the bottom of my suitcase, was now sitting on top of everything else, as if someone had been reading it and hadn't bothered to hide the fact. That evening, I made sure to take my key card, phone, and anything else valuable with me when I left the cabin. When I returned around midnight, Marco was waiting in the hallway near my room, sitting on a housekeeping cart and pretending to organize towels. The moment he saw me, his face lit up with that same uncomfortable smile. "Ah, perfect timing," he said, standing up and blocking my path to the door. "I was hoping to see you tonight. I wanted to apologize if I seemed too forward yesterday. Sometimes my English, it does not express what I mean correctly." His English seemed perfectly fine to me, but I nodded and said it was no problem, hoping he would move aside so I could get to my cabin. Instead, he stepped closer. "You know, I have been thinking about you today while I work. It must be lonely, traveling by yourself, eating meals alone, watching the shows with no one to talk to about them afterward." There was something predatory in his tone that made every instinct I had scream danger. "Maybe you would like some company tomorrow night. I get off work at 2 a.m. and I know places on the ship where passengers never go. Very private, very romantic." I firmly told him no, that I was perfectly happy traveling alone and didn't need any company. But Marco didn't seem deterred by my rejection. "I think you're just being shy," he said, reaching out and touching my arm in a way that made my skin crawl. "American women, sometimes they play hard to get." "Yes, but I'm very patient. I can wait." I pulled my arm away and told him more forcefully that I wasn't interested and that I wanted him to leave me alone. His friendly demeanor instantly changed, and for a moment, I saw something dark and angry flash across his face. "You think you are too good for me?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You think because you are passenger and I am crew, you can treat me like nothing?" The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and I realized I was completely alone in this hallway with someone who had access to my room, knew my schedule, and was clearly unstable. I managed to get past him and into my cabin, locking the door immediately, but I could hear him laughing in the hallway outside. Over the next 2 days, Marco's behavior escalated in ways that made me genuinely fear for my safety. He would appear wherever I went on the ship, by the pool, in the dining room, at the shows, always watching me from a distance, but making sure I knew he was there. When I returned to my cabin each day, I found increasingly personal items had been disturbed. My toiletries were rearranged. My clothes were obviously being handled in ways that went far beyond normal cleaning. And once I found a note tucked into my journal that simply said, "Soon," in handwriting I didn't recognize. I tried, reporting Marco to guest services, but the response was frustratingly dismissive. The woman behind the desk listened politely to my concerns, but explained that crew members were thoroughly screened and that cultural differences sometimes led to misunderstandings about appropriate behavior. She assured me they would speak with Marco about maintaining proper professional boundaries, but I got the impression they thought I was being oversensitive. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every sound in the hallway and double-checking that my door was locked. Around 3:00 a.m., I heard my keycard reader beep, followed by the sound of someone trying to turn the door handle. I lay frozen in bed as whoever was outside tried the handle several more times, then heard the unmistakable sound of a keycard being swiped again and again. The only thing preventing them from entering was the security latch I'd engaged from the inside, a latch that could only be opened by someone already in the room. After about 10 minutes of intermittent attempts to open the door, I heard footsteps moving away down the hallway. I didn't sleep all night after that, and first thing in the morning, I marched back to guest services and demanded to speak with security. This time I was taken more seriously, especially when I mentioned the attempted entry in the middle of the night. The head of security, a no-nonsense woman named Captain Rodriguez, listened with growing concern. She explained crew members had master key cards able to open passenger cabins, but they were supposed to be used only for emergencies or housekeeping during designated hours, always with proper authorization. The fact someone tried to enter at 3:00 a.m. was a serious security breach that warranted investigation. Within an hour, Captain Rodriguez returned with disturbing news. When confronted, Marco initially denied everything, but eventually admitted to checking on me, because he was worried about my safety as a solo female traveler. When they searched his crew quarters, they found photos of me taken without my knowledge, pictures of me by the pool, at dinner, walking the ship. Even more disturbing, they found similar photos of other female passengers from previous cruises, along with stolen personal items like jewelry and underwear. Marco was immediately confined to quarters and was to be turned over to authorities when we docked in Miami the next day. Captain Rodriguez assured me this was an extremely rare incident, and they would be reviewing crew screening procedures to prevent similar situations. She offered to move me to a different cabin for my last night, but I just wanted to get off the ship as quickly as possible. The experience destroyed what was supposed to be a healing solo vacation and left me with deep mistrust for cruise travel. The worst part wasn't just Marco's inappropriate behavior, was how easily he'd accessed my personal space and belongings without anyone noticing or caring. The thought that I'd been sleeping in a room someone with predatory intentions could enter at will still gives me nightmares. I never took another cruise after that. To this day, I can't stay in any hotel room without obsessively checking locks and security latches before I can relax enough to sleep. Back in March 2019, my wife Emily and I decided to take our first cruise together to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary. We'd talked about it for years, but between work and saving money, the timing was never right. Until then. We booked a 10-day Mediterranean cruise on Royal Caribbean's Oasis of the Seas, one of those massive floating cities with over 6,000 passengers and crew. The ship was enormous, and stepping on board in Barcelona felt like entering a whole new world with pools, rock-climbing walls, zip lines, theaters, and countless restaurants. Our cabin was on Deck 9, starboard side, with a small balcony overlooking the endless blue of the Mediterranean. The first few days were everything you'd expect from a dream vacation. Indulgent meals, drinks, and exploration of every corner of the ship. The ship became our whole world, and we loved every minute. On the 4th day at sea, somewhere between Italy and Greece, I noticed a woman during breakfast in the main dining room on Deck 3. She was sitting alone near the windows, probably in her mid-40s, with shoulder-length brown hair, wearing a bright yellow sundress. Something about her was off. She kept glancing around as if searching for someone, constantly checking her phone, but hardly touching her food. Emily noticed me staring and asked what was wrong, but I shrugged it off. Later, by the adult-only pool on Deck 11, I saw her again, walking along the promenade deck in the same yellow dress, looking frantically around. She approached several crew members, showing them a photograph, but each conversation ended with apologetic shakes of the head. Her desperate body language made me uncomfortable in ways I couldn't explain. When Emily went to the cabin for a nap, I followed the woman at a distance, intrigued by her distress. I watched her spend nearly an hour at guest services on Deck 4, growing increasingly agitated, her voice rising and hands gesturing wildly. The crew members behind the desk tried to stay professional, but seemed frustrated. Eventually, a security officer in a white uniform approached and spoke with her privately before escorting her away. That evening, at dinner with our table mates, a retired couple named George and Helen who'd been on many cruises, I mentioned the woman in yellow. Helen's face went pale. "We heard about that. She's looking for her traveling companion," she said softly. Apparently her friend had vanished 2 nights prior, never returning to their cabin, and no one had seen her since. George added gravely, "Ship security has been quietly investigating, but they're not saying much. These disappearances happen more than people realize, but cruise lines don't advertise it." The next morning, unable to sleep, I walked around the ship while it was still quiet. The usual bustle gives way to a ghostly silence, broken only by engines and occasional crew members. Near the lifeboats on Deck 7, I heard voices around a corner. Curiosity led me to see the woman in yellow again, now wearing jeans and a t-shirt, in a heated discussion with 3 crew members. One, a man with captain stripes, spoke calmly while the others looked uneasy. "You're not listening," she pleaded, voice cracking. "Isabella wouldn't just disappear. We've been best friends for 20 years. Something happened to her, and you're acting like she decided to take an extended vacation." The captain replied seriously, "Ma'am, we understand your concern. We're taking this very seriously, checking public areas, reviewing footage, and interviewing passengers and crew. Sometimes people need space or want to be alone for a while. The ship is large, with many quiet spots." She snapped back incredulously, "You think she's hiding from me? Do you know how ridiculous that sounds? Isabella has diabetes. She needs her insulin, which is in our cabin. She's been missing for 3 days." The gravity of her words hit me like a cold wave. This wasn't a simple case of someone wandering off. It was a medical emergency, and potentially worse. I stayed hidden behind a lifeboat, listening as the captain explained they'd escalated the matter to authorities, coordinated with the Coast Guard, and were conducting a thorough search. They were also reviewing 72 hours of security footage. The woman pressed about cameras, but the captain's response was cautious. The last confirmed sighting was Isabella leaving the schooner bar on Deck 4 at 11:47 p.m. Tuesday night. After that, footage was inconclusive. Her sobbing frustration filled the air. "So you're telling me my friend vanished into thin air on a ship in the mid-D? Middle of the ocean?" I quietly retreated to my cabin where Emily was getting ready. When she asked why I looked pale, I told her everything. The rest of the cruise was shadowed by a sinister and claustrophobic feeling. Every corridor seemed different, and I looked at other passengers with suspicion. Restricted areas, closed decks, so many places where someone could disappear. Passengers told us Isabella Monroe was 43 and from Portland, Oregon. The ship quietly increased security, more visible crew, and announcements urging passengers to report unusual activity. But life carried on for everyone else, with sunbathers and evening shows unaffected. On our last night, as we packed, Emily found a folded paper slipped under our cabin door. It was a shaky, handwritten note. "If you're the man who was listening near the lifeboats yesterday morning, please meet me at the solarium on Deck 11 at midnight. I need to tell someone what really happened to Isabella before we dock tomorrow. The crew won't listen. Jennifer." Emily and I debated whether to go. I was curious but scared of what we might learn. Eventually, curiosity won. At 11:55 p.m., we went to the solarium, usually deserted at night. Jennifer sat staring at the dark ocean, her eyes red and swollen as if she'd aged years in days. She thanked us for coming and whispered that Isabella didn't just disappear. She was scared of someone on the ship. She'd been receiving strange messages slipped under their door and had been followed for days. At first, Isabella thought it was paranoia, but the fear was real. The night Isabella vanished, she'd gone to meet someone at the bar who claimed knowledge about her stalker. She never came back. Jennifer tried getting the crew to take it seriously, but was dismissed as overreacting. Security even told her Isabella probably threw away threatening notes. Isabella was treated like a drunken troublemaker who wandered off. We docked in Barcelona the next morning, and I never learned Isabella's fate. Jennifer gave me her contact info, begging me to reach out if I heard anything, but I never did. Afterward, I researched missing cruise passengers and was shocked by how common such disappearances are, often unresolved. This experience changed how I view cruising. What once felt safe and controlled revealed a complex, sometimes dangerous reality. The ocean is vast and unforgiving, and in international waters, typical law enforcement is murky at best. I often think about Isabella Monroe and wonder if she fell accidentally, was pushed, or lives somewhere. Mostly, I think about Jennifer and the helpless look as she watched her best friend vanish without a trace in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. Back in November 2020, right in the heart of the pandemic, when cruise travel was just beginning to resume, my husband Michael and I decided to take what we believed would be a relaxing 14-day transatlantic cruise from Miami to Southampton. We had both been working as essential workers throughout the worst phases of COVID-19. I am an ICU nurse, and Michael is a paramedic, and we desperately needed a break from the constant stress and trauma we had endured for months. The cruise line, Oceanic Voyager, had implemented strict health protocols. including mandatory testing, reduced passenger capacity, and enhanced medical facilities on board, which gave us some confidence in the safety of traveling during such uncertain times. The Oceanic Voyager was a stunning ship capable of holding about 250 passengers at full capacity, but due to COVID-19 restrictions, we were cruising with only about 200 people on board. This created an almost luxurious feeling of space and privacy we had never experienced on prior cruises. Our cabin was on Deck 7, featuring a balcony that overlooked the endless Atlantic Ocean. The first few days felt perfect. The reduced passenger load meant shorter lines, more personalized service, and a calm, relaxed atmosphere. As healthcare workers who had spent nearly 2 years in a near-constant state of crisis, this peace and quiet was exactly what we needed. On the 6th day at sea, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 800 miles from the nearest land, everything went horribly wrong. We were having lunch at the Ocean Breeze Buffet when commotion erupted at the far end of the restaurant. A man in his 60s, likely traveling with his wife, suddenly collapsed while walking back to their table with a plate of food. At first, it seemed he may have tripped or fainted, but when Michael and I rushed over, our medical training kicked in immediately. The man, whose name we later learned was George, was conscious but clearly in severe distress. His breathing was labored, his skin had taken on a grayish hue, and he was clutching his chest in obvious pain. His wife, Gloria, was kneeling beside him, crying and asking what was wrong. Having seen countless similar symptoms as an ICU nurse, I knew instantly George was having a massive heart attack. Michael quickly checked his vitals while I tried to keep George calm and reassure Gloria. Within minutes, the ship's medical team arrived, a doctor and 2 nurses, all appearing far younger and less experienced than we expected. Dr. Thompson, the ship's physician, was soft-spoken and looked to be in his early 30s. As he examined George, concern clearly grew in his eyes. The ship's medical center, located on Deck 2, became our destination. The priority was getting George safely there for assessment. The medical team had a stretcher and some basic life support equipment, but as we navigated the corridors, it became painfully clear their resources were limited compared to a fully equipped hospital. Although the medical center was larger than I'd imagined, essentially a small clinic with a few exam rooms, some basic diagnostic devices, and about 6 hospital beds, its capacity to manage a cardiac emergency was minimal. They had basic EKG machines, some medications, and oxygen, but nothing close to the advanced cardiac care George desperately needed. Hours passed, and George's condition steadily deteriorated despite their best efforts. Gloria was allowed to stay with him, and her sobbing echoed through the small facility. Privately, Dr. Thompson explained that George required immediate cardiac catheterization and possibly emergency surgery, procedures impossible on a cruise ship miles from shore. The closest major medical facility was over 500 miles away, and even at top speed, it would take at least 18 hours to reach. After consideration, the captain diverted the ship toward the Azores, which had the nearest hospital with cardiac capabilities. Still, everyone understood time was against us. Dr. Thompson maintained contact with specialists on shore via satellite, who guided him through keeping George stable until medical care could be reached. But as night fell, it became clear George's state was critical and worsening rapidly. At approximately 2:12 a.m. glow, Ria's screams pierced the ship, waking half its passengers. George had gone into cardiac arrest. Despite desperate resuscitation attempts by the medical team, they lacked the equipment and expertise to save him. I watched through the medical center window as Dr. Thompson performed CPR for over 40 minutes, long past usual hospital protocols. His desperation was heartbreaking. His face reflected the grim reality of fighting both the relentless heart condition and severe shipboard limitations. At 2:47 a.m., Dr. Thompson ceased CPR and pronounced George dead. Gloria's anguished outcry was a raw, primal sound coming from the deepest part of her being. Michael and I had stayed with the family throughout the ordeal, sharing their tears. Though we had lost patients before, This situation felt particularly tragic. Watching someone die, knowing a few hours closer to a hospital, might have meant survival. The complex logistics of dealing with death at sea added another nightmare layer. The ship had a small morgue on the lower decks where George's body would be stored until reaching port. Gloria faced the harrowing choice: continue the cruise with her husband's body aboard, or arrange a costly emergency evacuation, complicated not only by price, but weather and distance. The cruise line offered to fly Gloria home from the Azores, but she chose to remain with George's body, completing the journey to Southampton, where family awaited to assist with arrangements. After George's death, a somber mood pervaded the ship. No entertainment or activity could lift it. Dr. Thompson appeared clearly traumatized. Michael and I spoke with him repeatedly, and he confided this was his worst nightmare as a ship physician, faced with a patient in grave need whom he lacked staff or equipment to help. He had worked on cruise ships for 5 years, primarily managing seasickness, minor injuries, and routine illnesses. But George's case exposed the frightening vulnerability of passengers when days away from proper medical facilities. This experience has profoundly changed how I view cruise travel, especially for older passengers or those with pre-existing conditions. Most people don't realize ship medical centers are essentially urgent care clinics with very limited capabilities. They are unequipped to handle serious cardiac events, strokes, complex trauma, or conditions requiring advanced diagnostics or surgery. In the vastness of the ocean, thousands of miles from the nearest hospital, you are gambling that nothing serious happens. Gloria kept in touch after the cruise and filed a lawsuit against the cruise company, alleging misrepresentation of onboard medical care. According to her attorney, George might have survived with more advanced cardiac equipment or a cardiology specialist on board rather than a general practitioner. The case was eventually settled out of court, but highlighted a stark gap between passenger expectations and the reality of shipboard medicine, particularly when stranded in the middle of the ocean with nowhere to run.